Some roads remember things they shouldn't. I'm Jake Whitmore, and I've been dispatching for Mountain West Transport for 16 years. In that time, I've heard every kind of story a trucker can tell. Blown tires in snowstorms, brake failures on mountain grades, lot lizards with switchblades. But nothing prepared me for what started happening on Highway 50 through Nevada in the summer of 2021. It began with the logs. Digital driving logs don't lie, they can't. Every mile, every stop, every minute of driving time gets recorded automatically. But 3 of our drivers running the Reno to Salt Lake route started showing something impossible. Mile marker 247, appearing twice in their logs. Not 246 and 248. 2 identical entries for 247, logged minutes apart. The first was Billy Reeves. 23 years on the road, clean record. Called it in over the CB. Voice tight with confusion. Dispatch, I'm showing mile marker 247 again. GPS says I'm making good time, but I just passed this same marker 10 minutes ago. I pulled up his electronic log. Sure enough, 2 entries for marker 247, 8 minutes apart. His truck's GPS showed steady eastbound progress. No stops, no delays, no detours. Then it was Maria Santos, running livestock from Fallon. Same thing, mile marker 247, logged twice, 12 minutes apart. She swore she never stopped, never turned around. Said the second time she saw it, the marker looked wrong somehow. Same numbers, same reflective surface, but positioned slightly different against the sagebrush. Third driver was Tommy Kozlov, hauling electronics. But Tommy didn't just log mile marker 247 twice. He logged it 4 times over the span of an hour, each entry showing him at a different speed, different time of day. When I called him, his voice shook. Jake, I'm looking at my GPS right now. Says I'm at mile marker 251, but the last physical marker I passed said 247. That was an hour ago. I started checking with Nevada DOT, thinking maybe they'd moved markers during construction. The woman on the phone was patient but firm. Sir, mile markers don't just appear twice. Highway 50 through that section is perfectly straight. No construction, no recent changes. Mile marker 247 is exactly where it's supposed to be. That's when Marcus Chen volunteered to check it out. Marcus was our best driver, 42 years old. 18 years over the road, never missed a delivery. He ran the Reno-Salt Lake route twice a week and knew every mile of Highway 50 like his own driveway. When I told him about the phantom marker reports, he just nodded thoughtfully. I'll take a look next run. Probably just some equipment glitch. Marcus left Reno on a Tuesday morning, hauling computer parts to Salt Lake. Clean truck, full maintenance, everything by the book. His route took him straight down Highway 50, through the Great Basin Desert. 150 miles of the loneliest road in America. Nothing but sagebrush, alkali flats, and mountains that looked like broken teeth against the sky. His first check-in came at 10:30, mile marker 220, right on schedule. Second check-in at 11:15, mile marker 235. GPS tracking showed him maintaining 65 miles per hour. No deviations, everything normal. At 11:47, Marcus keyed his CB. His voice sounded different, distant, almost dreamy. Dispatch, I'm at mile marker 247, pulling over to check something. What kind of something, Marcus? Long pause. Static filled the channel. Then, there's 2 of them, Jake. 2 identical mile markers. One where it should be and another one about 50 yards further east. They're both real. I felt something cold crawl up my spine. Marcus, your GPS shows you stopped. Everything okay? I'm walking between them now. Same height, same font, same everything. But the numbers look different up close. Like they're shifting. His voice grew fainter, like he was walking away from his truck. The second one doesn't have a shadow, Jake. Sun's right overhead, but it's not casting any shadow. Marcus, get back in your truck. Get back on the road. Static. Then, very faintly, there's a third one now, further east. How many of these things are there? That was the last transmission we received from Marcus Chen. His GPS tracker went dead at 11:51, not offline dead, like his truck had simply vanished from existence. I immediately called Nevada Highway Patrol and the Sheriff's Department. Search units were on the road within an hour. They found his truck at mile marker 247. Engine idling, CB radio on, driver's door open. Marcus's coffee cup was still warm on the dashboard. His logbook lay open to the current page, showing his location as mile marker 247. But underneath that entry, in his own handwriting, were dozens of other entries. Mile marker 247, written over and over in increasingly erratic script. The last entry was barely legible. How do I get back to 246? The truck's digital log was even stranger. It showed Marcus had been stopped at mile marker 247 for -17 minutes. The system had somehow recorded his arrival time as occurring after his disappearance. Search crews combed 50 miles of highway in both directions. They found Marcus's footprints leading east from his truck, clear as day in the alkaline dust. The prints were evenly spaced, unhurried, like he was taking a casual walk. But after exactly 437 feet, they stopped, not faded, stopped, mid-stride, as if Marcus had simply stepped out of existence. The official report listed Marcus Chen as missing, presumed dead, dehydration maybe, or disorientation from the desert heat. His truck was impounded, then returned to his widow. The highway patrol added extra patrols through that section, but they never found anything unusual. But drivers still call it in sometimes. Mile marker 247, logged twice, always twice. And sometimes, late at night when the desert wind is blowing just right, CB channel 19 picks up a transmission. Faint, distant, like it's coming from very far away. Dispatch, how do I get back to 246? I've been walking for hours, but every marker I reach says 247. They all say 247. I always key the mic when I hear it. Always try to respond. But there's never an answer, just static. And the endless desert wind. And somewhere out there in the Great Basin, Marcus Chen, still trying to find his way back to mile marker 246. We don't run drivers through that section alone anymore. Some exits lead to places that were never meant to be found. I'm Rebecca Torres, and I've been working dispatch for High Plains Trucking out of Cheyenne for 11 years. I know every mile of Interstate 80 through Wyoming like the back of my hand. Every rest stop, every way station, every truck-friendly exit between Nebraska and Utah. Which is why what happened to Sarah Martinez in October of 2022 still keeps me awake at night. Sarah was one of our best owner-operators, 38 years old, with a spotless safety record. She specialized in livestock transport, running cattle and sheep between ranches and processing plants across the Mountain West. Her Peterbilt was immaculate, her permits always current, her delivery times legendary among the ranchers who hired her. If Sarah Martinez said she'd be there at 6 a.m., you could set your watch by her arrival. The red desert stretch of I-80 is brutal in October wind that can knock a truck sideways, sudden temperature drops, and visibility that can go from clear to zero in minutes. It's 120 miles of nothing but sagebrush and alkali flats, with official rest stops spaced 40 miles apart. Sarah knew that route better than anyone, having hauled livestock through there twice a month for 8 years. She was carrying 30 head of Angus cattle from a ranch outside Rawlins to a processing plant in Salt Lake City when she made her last transmission. The livestock were getting restless. You could hear them shifting and lowing in the background as she keyed her CB. It was just past midnight, wind howling across the desert like something alive. Dispatch, this is Sarah in the Pete. I'm at mile marker 193 westbound. My animals are stressed. and I'm seeing some concerning behavior in the lead steer. I need to find a place to stop and check on them. Standard procedure. Livestock can injure themselves or each other when they're agitated, and Sarah was careful about animal welfare. Copy that, Sarah. Next official rest area is Rock Springs, about 30 miles ahead. Can you make it that far? Long pause. In the background, the cattle were making sounds I'd never heard before. Not the usual lowing, but something higher pitched, almost distressed. Actually, Rebecca, I'm seeing signs for a rest area coming up. Exit 207 says Devil's Backbone Rest Stop, truck parking available. I don't remember this one. I pulled up my route maps, cross-referenced with the state DOT database. Exit 207 showed as no services, just an old mining access road that dead-ended after 3 miles. Sarah, I'm not showing any rest facilities at that exit. Are you sure about the signage? I'm looking right at it. Big green highway sign, same as any other. White letters, reflective border, dot seal. Says rest area 1 mile. Truck parking, 24-hour facilities. The animals are really getting worked up back there. I need to stop. The cattle noise in the background was getting worse. Panicked bellowing mixed with the sound of hooves against metal. Something was definitely wrong. Okay, Sarah, but be careful. I'll stay on the radio with you. Taking the exit now. There's another sign here. Devil's Backbone Rest Stop. Established 1987. Roads paved. Recently striped. Looks legitimate. But it wasn't legitimate. I was checking and rechecking the Wyoming DOT records while she drove. No rest stop had ever been built at that location. The mining access road hadn't been maintained since the 1970s, when the copper operation shut down. It was just an overgrown dirt track leading to abandoned buildings and open mine shafts. Sarah, the state has no record of any rest facility at that location. I really think you should. I can see the buildings now, Rebecca. Nice setup, main facility, truck parking areas, even a fuel island. Looks new, well-maintained. There are other trucks here too. My blood went cold. Other trucks? Can you see any identifying marks? Company names? 3 or 4 big rigs in the parking area. Hard to make out details in the dark, but they look old. Like really old. Classic long-nosed Pete. Couple of Kenworths from maybe the 80s. Wait, that's strange. What's strange, Sarah? The fuel island is lit up, but there's no attendant. And the main building. All the windows are dark, but there's this weird blue light coming from somewhere inside. Like fluorescent, but wrong somehow. The cattle were going absolutely berserk now. Sounds I'd never heard from animals before. Like they were terrified of something. Sarah's voice was strained, trying to maintain control. I'm pulling up to the main building. Maybe someone inside can help me figure out what's spooking the animals. Sarah, don't get out of your truck. Something's not right about this place. I have to check on my cattle. They're hurting themselves back there. I heard her air brakes hiss. The engine idled down. The main building has a sign. Devil's Backbone Mining Company, safety first. But underneath, someone's painted over it. I can just make out. Welcome to the end of the line. Sarah, get back on the highway right now. The door's opening. Someone's coming out. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Rebecca, this guy's wearing a mining helmet with a carbide lamp, but his coveralls, they look like they haven't been washed in decades. And he's walking wrong, like his legs aren't bending right. Sarah, start your truck and get out of there. He's waving me toward the back of the building. There's a loading dock back there. Looks like it goes down underground. And Rebecca, the other trucks in the parking lot. Their license plates are all from the 1980s, but the metal's not rusted. It's like they're brand new, but old at the same time. The radio crackled with static. When Sarah's voice came back, it sounded distant, like she was speaking from very far away. The man with the lamp is pointing down into the loading dock. I can see stairs going down into the mine. There's that blue light again, coming from deep underground. And the smell, Rebecca. It's like sulfur and old meat and something else. Something chemical. Sarah, you need to leave right now. The cattle have gone quiet. Completely quiet. That's not normal. They were panicking a minute ago, and now I can't hear anything from the trailer. I'm going to check on them. No, stay in your cab. But I could hear her door opening, her boots on gravel, the sound of her walking toward the back of her trailer. Then she was running, her breathing heavy over the CB. Rebecca, the trailer's empty, completely empty. But I never stopped anywhere, never opened the doors. 30 head of cattle don't just vanish. Get back in your truck. The man with the lamp is coming this way. He's moving faster now, but still wrong. Like he's gliding over the ground instead of walking. And his face, God, his face looks like it's been underground too long, pale and stretched, and his eyes reflect light like an animal's. Static filled the channel. When Sarah's voice returned, it was barely a whisper. Rebecca, there are more of them coming out of the mine. Dozens of them. All wearing those old mining helmets. All walking wrong. And behind them, something bigger. Something that makes the blue light. Sarah, they're not human, Rebecca. They look human from a distance. But up close, there's something else. Something that's been down in the dark too long. And they want me to follow them underground. They keep pointing down into the mine. And when they point, that blue light gets brighter. The transmission cut to static. I tried raising her for hours. Contacted the Wyoming Highway Patrol. Had them send units to exit 207. They found nothing but an overgrown dirt road leading to abandoned mine buildings. No rest stop. No fuel island. No Sarah Martinez. Her truck was discovered 3 days later by a rancher, parked at the edge of an open mine shaft 20 miles from the highway. The trailer was empty, as Sarah had said, but the loading ramp was down, and there were cattle tracks leading from the trailer to the edge of the shaft, then nothing. The tracks just stopped, as if 30 head of cattle had walked off the edge of the earth. Sarah was never found. The official report listed her as missing, presumed dead, possibly fallen into the mine shaft. But the rancher who found her truck said something that still haunts me. He said he'd been running cattle in that area for 40 years, and the old Devil's Backbone mine had been sealed with concrete back in 1973. The shaft they found her truck beside wasn't supposed to exist. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm working the graveyard shift, I get reports of truckers seeing signs for the Devil's Backbone rest stop. Always at exit 207. Always when their cargo is livestock. I tell them to keep driving, no matter what they see, no matter how legitimate the signs look. Because some exits don't lead to rest. They lead to places where things that should stay buried come up to feed. Time doesn't flow the same way for everyone. I'm Dennis Caldwell, and I've been working as a way station inspector for the Oregon Department of Transportation for 14 years. My station sits on Interstate 84 near the Columbia River Gorge, where the highway cuts through basalt cliffs and Douglas fir forests stretch down to the water. It's one of the busiest freight corridors on the West Coast, and I've checked thousands of trucks rolling between Portland and points east. The station operates 24 hours, with 3 inspectors rotating shifts. We check weight limits, safety equipment, driver logs, routine stuff that keeps dangerous rigs off the road. The job requires attention to detail and patience with drivers who've been on the road for days. Most truckers are professional, courteous, understanding that we're just doing our jobs. In 14 years, I'd seen every type of driver, every kind of rig, every excuse for overweight loads or faulty equipment. What I'd never seen was the same conversation happening twice, word for word, 24 hours apart. It started with small things in late September of 2023. CB radio chatter bleeding through on our station equipment, which wasn't unusual. CB frequencies can bounce off atmospheric conditions, carry further than normal. But this chatter was different. Drivers would key their radios to talk to us, and sometimes we'd hear what sounded like the same voice, saying the same words, but with slightly different timing. At first, I thought it was just similar conversations. Truckers use standard phrases, follow predictable patterns when checking in at weigh stations. Good morning. This is eastbound commercial motor vehicle requesting permission to bypass. Standard stuff. But then I started keeping notes, and the similarities became impossible to ignore. On a Tuesday morning, driver Kelly Morrison, in a blue Kenworth, called in, "Inspector, I'm showing an axle weight warning light. Can you take a look at my rear tandems?" 24 hours later, Wednesday morning, same time, same voice, same words, identical transmission, down to the way she cleared her throat before speaking. I mentioned it to my supervisor, Jim Hendricks, during our weekly meeting. He laughed it off. "Dennis, after 14 years of listening to truckers, they probably all sound the same to you. Time to take some vacation." But it kept happening. Thursday, driver Martin Cruz reported a loose mud flap. Friday, same transmission, word for word. Same concern about DOT regulations. Same hesitation when he mentioned not wanting a citation. The only difference was that Friday's transmission came through with strange interference static that sounded almost like voices whispering in the background. That's when I started recording the radio traffic. By October, the phenomenon was consistent enough that I could predict what certain drivers would say before they said it. Not just the content, but the exact phrasing, the timing, even background noises like engines running or other trucks passing. It was like listening to recordings played back 24 hours later. The weirdest part was that the drivers themselves didn't seem to notice. I'd hear Kelly Morrison's transmission about her axle weight on Tuesday. Then when she came through Wednesday saying the exact same words, I'd ask if she'd been through the station the day before. She'd look confused, check her logbook, insist it was her first time through that route in a week. The interference was getting worse too. What started as faint static became clearer sounds, voices having conversations that didn't match what the drivers were actually saying. Sometimes I'd hear a driver's voice giving completely different information than what they were saying in real time. A driver would be reporting normal operations, while his radio somehow transmitted distress calls, requests for emergency assistance, pleas for help. That's when Big Bob Thompson came through on a Thursday night in mid-October. Bob was a legend among West Coast truckers, 55 years old, 30 years on the road, driving a perfectly maintained Peterbilt that gleamed even in the harsh truck stoplights. He knew every inspector, every weigh station, every truck stop between Seattle and Los Angeles. When Bob's voice came over the radio, you paid attention, because he never wasted words and never had problems with his rig. "Evening, Dennis. Big Bob in the red Pete, westbound with electronics. Requesting bypass if my numbers look good." Standard check-in. I pulled up his pre-clearance data. Everything showing green. "Evening, Bob. You're clear for bypass. Have a safe trip." But as he acknowledged and signed off, I heard something else bleeding through on his frequency. Another voice, identical to Bob's, but strained with panic. "Dennis, don't let me stop here tomorrow night. Whatever you do, don't let the red Pete enter the station. Something's wrong with this place. Time's not working right." The transmission faded into static before I could respond. I tried to raise Bob, but he was already past the station, rolling west toward Portland. I checked my recording equipment, played back the conversation. Bob's normal check-in was there, clear as day, but the panicked transmission, the one warning about tomorrow night, wasn't on the recording, like it had never happened. 24 hours later, Big Bob came through again. Same time, same truck, same cargo. But this time, as he approached the weigh station, his transmission was different from the night before. "Dennis, this is Bob. I'm getting some kind of interference on my radio. Keep hearing my own voice telling me not to stop there. You hearing anything strange on your end?" My blood went cold. This was it, the 24-hour echo. But Bob was aware of it somehow. "Bob, I need you to bypass the station. Don't stop here tonight." "Copy that. But why? Is there some kind of—" His voice cut off. replaced by the panicked transmission I'd heard the night before. "Dennis, don't let me stop here tomorrow night. Whatever you do, don't let the red Pete enter the station." Then, impossibly, I heard Bob's voice responding to his own warning. "What do you mean, don't stop? I'm already pulling in. The signs are directing me to the inspection bay. Why would you tell me not to?" Static filled the channel. When it cleared, there was only silence. I ran outside to the inspection bay. Empty. No red Peterbilt, no Big Bob, no truck at all. But the electronic scales were reading a full weight measurement. Sensors showing a truck positioned perfectly on the platform. The automated system was processing an inspection for a vehicle that wasn't there. I pulled the surveillance footage from that night. At the exact time Bob's transmission cut off, the cameras showed something that shouldn't have been possible. For exactly 3 seconds, a ghostly image of his red Peterbilt appeared in the inspection bay, translucent, flickering, like a double exposure on old film. Then it faded away, leaving only empty concrete. The next day, Oregon State Police found Bob's truck in a rest area 30 miles east of the station. Engine running, driver's door open, CB radio keyed to transmit but picking up only static. Bob was gone. His logbook showed he'd never passed through our way station at all, no entry for that night, no record of the conversation that had terrified him into disappearance. But his CB radio kept transmitting for 3 days after they found the abandoned truck. The same message, over and over, growing fainter each time. "Dennis, don't let me stop here tomorrow night. Something's wrong with this place. Time's not working right." I transferred to a different station the following month. But sometimes, when I'm working late shifts, I hear Bob's voice on the radio, still trying to warn drivers about a place where yesterday's conversations become tomorrow's prophecies, where time doubles back on itself like an echo that arrives before the original sound. They never found Big Bob Thompson. But every year on that same October night, truckers passing the Columbia River Gorge way station report hearing a panicked voice on Channel 19, warning them not to stop at a place they're already approaching. A place where the future keeps trying to change. A past that's already happened. Some things measure time differently than the rest of the world. I'm Angela Morrison, and I've been working emergency dispatch for Albany County Sheriff's Department for 9 years. Route 287 through the Laramie Plains is part of my coverage area, a lonely stretch of 2-lane highway that connects small ranching communities across southeastern Wyoming. It's the kind of road where you might see 3 vehicles in an hour, where antelope outnumber people, and where the wind never stops blowing across endless grassland. The calls I handle are usually straightforward. Cattle on the roadway, minor accidents, travelers needing directions. The Laramie Plains don't generate much excitement, just wide-open country under an enormous sky, with scattered ranches and the occasional grain elevator marking old railroad stops from a century ago. It's peaceful work, mostly, the kind where you know all the regular truckers by voice and can predict exactly when old Pete Kowalski will call in his weekly report from his ranch north of Bosler. The grain elevator at mile marker 47 has been abandoned since the railroad stopped running grain trains in the 1980s. It's a concrete tower, about 60 feet tall, weathered gray and streaked with rust stains, standing alone in a field of buffalo grass. Most locals don't even notice it anymore. Just another piece of forgotten agricultural history, slowly crumbling back into the prairie. But in November of 2023, that elevator started causing problems I'd never seen before. The first call came from Jerry Patterson, an independent trucker hauling hay bales to Laramie. He sounded confused, maybe a little embarrassed. "Dispatch, this is odd, but I think there's something wrong with my truck's clock. It was running backwards for about 5 minutes while I was passing that old grain elevator on 287. I took down his information, suggested he might need electrical work. Truck clocks malfunction all the time, loose wires, dying batteries, electronic glitches. But Jerry was insistent that it had only happened while he could see the elevator. Once it disappeared in his mirrors, the clock resumed normal operation. 3 days later, Maria Santos called with the same complaint. Different truck, different company, but the same story. Clock running backwards while passing mile marker 47. Then it was Doug Chen. Then Lisa Rodriguez. All experienced drivers, all reporting identical malfunctions in the same location. I started keeping a log of the calls. Over 2 weeks, 7 different truckers reported the same phenomenon. Not similar, identical. Clocks running backwards at exactly the same rate. Starting when the grain elevator came into view, stopping when it disappeared. All digital clocks, all different manufacturers, all showing the same impossible behavior. That's when Jennifer Walsh and her husband came through. The Walsh team was well known on the Wyoming trucking circuit, Jennifer, 29, and her husband Carl, 33, running a clean Freightliner and pulling dry goods between Denver and Billings. They'd been team driving for 6 years, had an excellent safety record, and were known for their professionalism and reliability. When Jennifer's voice came over the radio that Thursday evening, I could tell immediately something was wrong. Dispatch, this is Jennifer in the blue Freightliner, northbound mile marker 45. I need to report a situation with our equipment. Her voice was tight, controlled, but underneath I heard something that sounded like fear. Go ahead, Jennifer. What kind of situation? Our dashboard clock started running backwards about 2 minutes ago. But that's not the weird part. The weird part is that Carl's wristwatch is doing it too. And the clock on my phone, every timepiece in this truck is counting backwards. And they're all keeping the same reverse time. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Multiple devices failing simultaneously wasn't an electrical problem. It was something else entirely. Jennifer, can you see the old grain elevator from your position? Long pause. Yeah, we can see it. It's about a mile ahead on the right. How did you... I need you to keep driving. And let me know when the clocks return to normal. Angela, what's going on? You sound like you've heard this before. I had heard it before, but I'd never heard of it affecting multiple devices at once. Just keep me posted on your status. For 3 minutes, Jennifer provided updates. All timepieces in the truck running backwards at the same rate. Carl was getting agitated. Team drivers depend on precise timing for their mandatory rest periods, and seeing time move in reverse was deeply unsettling. Then, as they passed mile marker 48, everything returned to normal. Clocks are running forward again, Jennifer reported. But Angela, we lost 6 minutes. The clocks show 6:17 p.m. now, but they showed 6:23 before they started running backwards. It's like those 6 minutes just disappeared. That night, I called the Wyoming Department of Transportation and requested a maintenance check on the grain elevator. Maybe there was some kind of electromagnetic field, some unusual mineral deposit in the area causing electronic interference. The response came back 2 days later. The elevator was structurally sound, posed no highway hazard, and showed no unusual readings on their electromagnetic surveys. But the reports kept coming, and they were getting worse. Truckers started describing other effects while passing the elevator. Shadows that fell in the wrong direction. Radio static that sounded like voices speaking backwards. One driver swore he saw his own truck's headlights shining from behind the elevator, as if his vehicle was somehow approaching from the opposite direction simultaneously. Then came the call that changed everything. It was Carl Walsh, Jennifer's husband, and his voice was breaking with panic. Dispatch, I need immediate assistance. Mile marker 47 on 287. My wife, something's happened to my wife. Carl, what's your situation? We were passing that damn elevator again, southbound this time. The clocks started going backwards like before, but Jennifer got out of the truck. She said she could hear counting, like a countdown, but backwards. She said she needed to find where it started. Where is Jennifer now? She's walking backwards down the highway. Not walking backwards like she's going in reverse. Walking backwards like she's trying to undo her steps. like she's trying to walk back through time. And Angela, she looks older. She looks like she's aged years in the past 10 minutes. I dispatched the nearest patrol unit and got in my own vehicle. 20 minutes to mile marker 47. The longest 20 minutes of my career. When I arrived, I found Carl's truck parked on the shoulder, emergency flashers running. Carl was standing beside it, staring at something further south on the highway. Jennifer was walking backwards down the center line, moving slowly but steadily. But Carl was right. She looked older, much older. Her dark hair was streaked with gray, her face lined with wrinkles that hadn't been there hours earlier. She moved with the careful, deliberate steps of someone much older than 29. "Jennifer!" I called out. But she didn't respond. She just kept walking backwards, her eyes fixed on something only she could see. I got close enough to hear her talking to herself. A constant whisper. 58, 57, 56. I have to get back to before zero. I have to get back to before it started counting down. We tried to stop her, tried to turn her around, but every time we touched her, she aged more rapidly. Her hair went completely white. Her skin became papery and spotted. The state patrol officer who arrived said later that it was like watching someone's life run in fast-forward reverse, getting older while moving backwards through space. Jennifer walked backwards for 3 miles before we lost sight of her in the darkness. When the sun came up, search teams found her clothes scattered along the highway, leading back toward the grain elevator. But no sign of Jennifer herself. The official report listed her as missing, presumed dead due to exposure or disorientation. But Carl knew better. Carl knew that his wife had found whatever she was looking for. She'd walked backwards through time until she reached the moment before the counting started. And then she'd simply ceased to exist in our timeline. The grain elevator still stands at mile marker 47. Truckers still report clocks running backwards when they pass it. But now they also report seeing a figure walking backwards along the highway, a woman with white hair and an aged face, still counting down, still trying to find her way back to before the backwards time began. I transferred to a different district 6 months later, but sometimes on quiet nights, I still hear Jennifer's voice on the radio, older now, faded, but still counting backwards, still trying to undo whatever started that countdown, at the grain elevator, where time flows the wrong way. Cold has a way of preserving things that should have been lost. I'm Patricia Vance, and I've been the night manager at Frostbite Junction Truck Stop on Highway 2 for 12 years. We're positioned in the heart of North Dakota's prairie pothole region, where the landscape rolls like a frozen ocean, and winter temperatures can hit 40 below zero without the wind chill. Our truck stop serves the long-haul drivers, running freight between Minot and Grand Forks, a lifeline in country so remote that the next services are 60 miles in either direction. Frostbite Junction operates around the clock, year-round. We have 8 diesel pumps, a small convenience store, shower facilities, and a diner that serves coffee strong enough to wake the dead. During blizzards, we've sheltered dozens of stranded truckers, and in summer, we're an oasis for drivers crossing the prairie under a sun that bakes the asphalt until it shimmers. The job requires patience with exhausted drivers, familiarity with every brand of engine additive, and a tolerance for the isolation that comes with managing a truck stop in the middle of nowhere. What the job had never required, until January of 2024, was explaining why our diesel fuel had started freezing solid the moment it left the pumps. It began during what locals call the January thaw, a brief warm spell when temperatures climbed from 20 below to a balmy 15 above zero. Truckers were grateful for the reprieve, shedding layers and actually smiling as they fueled up. The pumps were working normally, dispensing number 2 diesel at the standard temperature. Everything routine and predictable. Then Charlie Barnes tried to fuel his Kenworth at pump 4. Charlie had been running freight through our stop for 8 years, a steady professional who knew diesel engines better than most mechanics. When he came into the store cursing and shaking his head, I figured he was dealing with a routine pump malfunction, card reader problems, nozzle issues, the usual headaches. "Pat, something's wrong with pump 4. The fuel's coming out ice cold. I mean ice cold. Cold enough that it's steaming when it hits the air. And it froze solid on my fuel tank cap." He held up the cap, which was coated in a layer of ice thick enough to completely seal the opening. "In 15-degree weather, Pat. How does diesel freeze in 15-degree weather?" I walked out to pump 4 with Charlie, expecting to find a simple explanation. Maybe water in the fuel lines? Maybe a problem with the underground storage tank heating system? But when Charlie demonstrated the problem, I saw something that shouldn't have been possible. The diesel was dispensing normally from the nozzle, but vapor was rising from it like it was superheated, except the vapor was moving wrong, sinking instead of rising, pooling around the pump like invisible fog. When Charlie held up a plastic bottle to catch a sample, the fuel froze solid the instant it hit the container, forming crystalline structures that looked more like ice sculptures than petroleum products. I checked the underground tank temperature readings. Normal. Checked the pump heating elements. Functioning properly. The fuel should have been dispensing at 45 degrees Fahrenheit, warm enough to flow freely in any weather we typically see. But somehow, somewhere between the storage tank and the nozzle, it was dropping to a temperature that made it behave like liquid nitrogen. Over the next week, the problem spread to other pumps. Pump 3 started dispensing frozen fuel on Tuesday, Pump 7 on Thursday. By the following Monday, half our pumps were producing diesel so cold it would freeze coffee solid if you poured it in a cup. The fuel company sent technicians who couldn't explain what they were seeing. The state inspector took samples that tested normal once they warmed up, showing no contamination or unusual additives. But the strangest part was that some truckers didn't seem to notice. They'd fuel up at the affected pumps, pay their bills, and drive away without mentioning anything unusual. When I'd ask if they'd experienced any problems, they'd look confused, insist everything had been fine. It was like the frozen fuel only affected certain people under certain conditions. That's when David Kowalski came through on a Friday night in late January. David was a refrigerated freight specialist, 44 years old, hauling frozen foods from a processing plant in Minnesota to distributors in Montana. His reefer unit required precise temperature control to maintain the cold chain, and he was meticulous about fuel quality and truck maintenance. When David pulled up to Pump 6 at 11:30 p.m., I was covering the overnight shift alone, the prairie wind howling across empty parking lots under a sky full of stars. Pump 6 had been acting up for 3 days, not dispensing frozen fuel like the others, but showing temperature readings that fluctuated wildly on our monitoring system. 1 minute it would read normal, the next it would spike to impossible lows, then return to baseline. Our technician had checked it twice, found nothing wrong with the equipment. David came into the store while his truck was fueling, bought coffee and a sandwich, made small talk about road conditions. Normal interaction, nothing unusual. But after about 10 minutes, I realized he hadn't come back in to pay. Through the window, I could see his truck still positioned at Pump 6, fuel nozzle inserted, but no sign of David. I walked out to check on him, thinking maybe he'd fallen asleep in his cab. Long-haul drivers sometimes dozed off during fuel stops. But as I approached his truck, I noticed something that made me stop in my tracks. The air around Pump 6 was shimmering, like heat waves, but moving in the wrong direction. The distortion was flowing downward, pooling around the base of the pump, and where it touched the concrete, frost was forming in intricate patterns. David was standing beside his truck, one hand on the fuel nozzle, completely motionless, not moving, not breathing, not even blinking. At first I thought he was having some kind of medical emergency, stroke, heart attack, something that had frozen him in place. But when I got closer, I could see that his eyes were open, alert, tracking my movement. He was conscious but completely unable to move. The fuel nozzle in his hand was coated with ice so thick it looked like crystal. The diesel flowing from it wasn't liquid anymore, it was pouring out as solid chunks, geometric shapes that shattered when they hit the ground like frozen glass. The temperature around the pump was dropping so rapidly I could see my breath, watch frost form on David's jacket and hair as I watched. I tried to reach for the nozzle, pull it from his hand, but the moment I got within 3 feet of the pump, the cold hit me like a physical force. Not just cold air cold that penetrated through clothes, through skin, through bone. Cold that made my joints seize up and my thoughts slow down. I stumbled backward, gasping, and watched helplessly as more ice formed around David's motionless figure. That's when I saw his eyes. Still aware, still conscious, but filled with terror. He could see what was happening to him, could feel himself being frozen solid from the outside in, but couldn't move or speak or call for help. The ice was spreading up his arm now, covering his shoulder, creeping toward his neck with deliberate, unstoppable progress. I ran back to the store and called 911, but by the time the paramedics arrived 20 minutes later, David Kowalski had become part of the pump. Ice had covered his entire body, sealing him to the fuel nozzle, the truck, and the concrete pad in a single crystalline structure. The temperature readings around Pump 6 showed minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, while the air 10 feet away remained a comfortable 22 above zero. The paramedics couldn't get close enough to check for vital signs. The fire department brought heating equipment, but the ice wouldn't melt. It absorbed the heat without changing temperature, like it was made of something other than frozen water. When they finally managed to chip away enough ice to examine David, they found him perfectly preserved, eyes still open, still holding the fuel nozzle, as if he'd been flash frozen mid-motion. The coroner ruled it death by hypothermia, caused by equipment malfunction. The fuel company shut down Pump 6 permanently, blamed a catastrophic failure in the temperature regulation system. But they never explained how a pump malfunction could create temperatures that would instantly freeze a human being, or why David's body showed no signs of decomposition even after being moved to the morgue. We reopened the other pumps after extensive testing, but I requested a transfer to the day shift. I couldn't handle being alone with those pumps anymore, knowing that somewhere in the underground tanks, diesel fuel was waiting at temperatures that shouldn't exist, ready to freeze time itself for the next driver, unlucky enough to use the wrong pump at the wrong moment. Sometimes, on winter nights when the wind is particularly fierce, I drive past Frostbite Junction and see frost forming around Pump 6 even though it's been permanently sealed and disconnected. They say cold preserves things, but some things should never be preserved, should never be kept frozen in the moment of their terror, waiting in the ice for someone to finally let them thaw. Some voices on the radio are calling from places you haven't been yet. I'm Raymond Becerra, and I've been working CB radio monitoring for the New Mexico State Police for 13 years. My station covers Interstate 25 through the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, where the highway climbs from Santa Fe toward Colorado, through some of the most beautiful and dangerous terrain in the Southwest. The mountains rise like broken teeth against enormous skies, and in winter, the road can become a sheet of ice that sends trucks sliding into canyons without warning. My job involves monitoring CB Channel 19 for emergency calls, coordinating with dispatch, and maintaining contact with long-haul truckers who use the highway as their lifeline between Texas and Colorado. The work requires patience, good ears, and familiarity with trucker jargon that can turn a simple mechanical problem into a 15-minute conversation about Smokey Bears and chicken coops. Most calls are routine reports of road conditions, requests for directions, warnings about speed traps or construction zones. But in March of 2024, I started receiving calls that couldn't be routine because they were reporting events that hadn't happened yet. The first anomaly came from a driver named Helen Martinez, hauling furniture from Albuquerque to Denver. Her transmission was clear, professional, Exactly what you'd expect from an experienced trucker. Breaker 19. This is northbound commercial vehicle at mile marker 243. Requesting assistance with a blown front tire. Standard. Call. I logged the information, dispatched a service truck, and directed Helen to the nearest safe pullout. But when the service truck arrived at mile marker 243, there was no sign of Helen or her truck. The driver searched a 5-mile radius, found nothing. When I tried to raise Helen on the radio, her response confused me. Raymond? What service truck? I'm at mile marker 238. No problems with my tires. Been running smooth all day. I checked my logs. Helen's emergency call had come through at 2:15 p.m., reporting trouble at mile marker 243. But at 2:15, according to her electronic logging device, Helen had been at mile marker 238 with no mechanical problems. Somehow, I'd received a distress call about an incident that had never occurred. Over the next 2 weeks, it happened 6 more times. Drivers reporting accidents, breakdowns, and emergencies at specific locations, but when help arrived, there was no sign of trouble. The drivers themselves had no memory of making the calls and insisted they'd never experienced the problems they'd supposedly reported. Each call was clear, detailed, and completely impossible. The transmissions all came from the same stretch of highway mile markers 240 to 255, where I-25 winds through a narrow canyon with sheer rock walls rising hundreds of feet on both sides. It's a challenging section even in good weather, with tight curves and steep grades that test truck brakes and engine power. Local truckers call it Signal Hill because the canyon walls can interfere with radio transmission, creating dead zones and strange echoes. But these weren't echoes. These were conversations with drivers who were reporting events that hadn't happened yet, or events that were happening in some other version of reality that existed parallel to our own. That's when Antonio Rodriguez came through the canyon on a Thursday afternoon in late March. Antonio was a legend among Southwest truckers, 51 years old, 28 years on the road, with a safety record so spotless that insurance companies used him as a reference point for calculating premiums. He ran a meticulously maintained Peterbilt between El Paso and Denver, carrying electronics and computer components for technology companies. When Antonio's voice came over Channel 19, other drivers would quiet down to listen, because anything Antonio Rodriguez had to say was worth hearing. At 3:20 p.m., I received a transmission that made my blood run cold. Mayday, Mayday. This is Antonio Rodriguez in the blue Peterbilt, northbound mile marker 247. I've lost my brakes on the downgrade. Truck is out of control. Impact imminent. Repeat. Truck out of control. Requesting immediate emergency response. The transmission was clear, unmistakably Antonio's voice, filled with the controlled panic of a professional driver facing catastrophic mechanical failure. I immediately dispatched emergency services to mile marker 247 and tried to raise Antonio for additional information. Antonio, this is State Police Dispatch. What's your current status? Dispatch, this is Antonio. I'm northbound mile marker 244. Everything normal. What emergency are you responding to? Antonio, did you just report brake failure at mile marker 247? Long pause. Negative. Dispatch. My brakes are functioning normally. I'm maintaining speed. No mechanical problems. But I'd heard the Mayday call. Recorded it. Played it back 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Antonio Rodriguez, in his own voice, reporting brake failure and imminent impact at mile marker 247. Yet the real Antonio Rodriguez was 3 miles away, experiencing no problems whatsoever. 20 minutes later, I received another transmission from Antonio. Dispatch, this is strange, but I'm approaching mile marker 247, and there's been an accident here. Blue Peterbilt looks like it lost control on the downgrade and hit the canyon wall. I'm stopping to render assistance. Antonio, can you identify the vehicle? That's the weird part, dispatch. It's identical to my truck. Same model, same color, Same company markings, and the license plate. The license plate matches mine exactly. I felt something cold crawl up my spine. Antonio, do not approach that vehicle. Maintain your distance and wait for emergency personnel. Too late, dispatch. I'm already out of my cab. The driver's door is crushed, but I can see inside. There's someone behind the wheel, but his voice trailed off into static. Antonio, report your status. When his transmission resumed, Antonio's voice was shaking. Dispatch, the driver in the crashed truck. It's me. It's my face, my clothes, everything. He's dead. Been dead for a while from the look of it. But it's definitely me. I'm looking at my own body in my own truck. Antonio, get back in your vehicle immediately. The dead me is holding a CB microphone. And dispatch, there's something else. The truck's still running, engine idling, and the CB radio is transmitting. I can hear my own voice coming through the speakers, calling in the accident. The dead me is making the Mayday call I heard 20 minutes ago. The transmission cut to static. When it cleared, I heard Antonio's voice again, but different, distant, overlapping with itself. Mayday, Mayday. This is Antonio Rodriguez in the blue Peterbilt. Northbound mile marker, 247. I've lost my brakes on the downgrade. Truck is out of control. Impact imminent. It was the same transmission I'd received earlier, but now I was hearing it in real time, coming from the crashed truck's radio, while Antonio stood beside it, listening to his own dead voice report the accident that had killed him. Antonio, respond immediately, but there was only static, then silence. Emergency crews found Antonio's truck parked beside the crashed Peterbilt at mile marker 247. Both vehicles were identical in every detail. Same license plates, same cargo manifests, same electronic logging records. The crashed truck contained a body that was unmistakably Antonio Rodriguez, killed on impact when his brakes failed on the downgrade. But Antonio Rodriguez was nowhere to be found. The official report listed the incident as a single vehicle accident with one fatality. The surviving truck was impounded as evidence, then released to Antonio's company when no logical explanation could be found for the presence of two identical vehicles. But the CB radio in the crashed truck continued transmitting for 3 days after the accident, the same Mayday call, repeating every 20 minutes, Antonio's voice calling for help from beyond death. I transferred to a different monitoring station 6 months later. But sometimes, when atmospheric conditions are just right, I still pick up transmissions from Signal Hill. Antonio's voice, reporting brake failure at mile marker 247, requesting emergency assistance for an accident that happened in a timeline where he died instead of disappeared. In the canyon where radio waves bounce between dimensions, carrying voices from futures that never quite arrive, but never quite go away either. Some warehouses are bigger on the inside than they have any right to be. I'm Gerald Hoffman, and I've been working security for Meridian Distribution Center in Bakersfield's Industrial District for 7 years. The facility is a standard 21st century logistics hub, 300,000 square feet of concrete and steel, serving as a transfer point for goods moving between the Port of Los Angeles and inland destinations. My job involves monitoring cameras, checking driver credentials, and ensuring that deliveries reach their assigned loading bays without incident. Meridian operates 24 hours a day, with a constant flow of trucks arriving, unloading, and departing. The facility has 48 loading bays arranged in a straight line along the north wall, each equipped with hydraulic dock levelers and overhead doors that can accommodate everything from small delivery trucks to 53-foot trailers. During peak hours, all 48 bays might be occupied simultaneously, creating a choreographed dance of logistics that requires precise timing and coordination. The work is routine, most of the time checking paperwork, directing traffic, resolving minor disputes between drivers and dock workers. Occasionally, there are problems with deliveries that can't be located, or drivers who insist they've been assigned to bays that don't match our records. But these issues are usually resolved with patience and careful checking of dispatch documents. What I'd never dealt with, until April of 2024, was a driver who claimed to have been walking through our loading dock for several years without finding the exit. The first sign of trouble came from our inventory tracking system. For 3 consecutive nights, the system registered activity in loading bays that didn't exist, bay numbers higher than 48, extending into what should have been solid concrete wall. The computer showed cargo movements, dock door operations, and forklift activity in bays 53, 67, 81, and dozens of others that were physically impossible. I reported the glitch to our IT department, assuming it was a software error or corrupted database. They ran diagnostics, found no problems with the system, and suggested the sensors might be picking up interference from nearby facilities. But the phantom activity continued, showing increasingly high bay numbers locations that would place them hundreds of yards beyond the actual building footprint. Then drivers started mentioning confusion about the loading dock layout. Professional truckers who'd been making deliveries to Meridian for years suddenly couldn't find their assigned bays, reporting that the dock seemed longer than they remembered. Some claimed to have walked past Bay 48 and found additional bays extending further down the building, even though I could see from the security office that the wall ended at Bay 48 exactly as it always had. When I checked the surveillance footage, it showed drivers walking normally along the loading dock, reaching Bay 48, then continuing. The cameras tracked them moving past the end of the building, but somehow they remained visible on screen, walking beside loading bays that shouldn't exist. They'd disappear from view after a few minutes, then emerge from the front entrance, claiming they'd gotten lost and couldn't find their assigned bay. I started walking the loading dock personally during quiet periods, measuring distances, counting bays, trying to understand what drivers were experiencing. From my perspective, everything appeared normal: 48 bays, concrete wall, end of building. But occasionally, when the lighting was just right and I wasn't focusing directly on the end wall, I'd catch glimpses of something that didn't belong. Shadows that suggested additional space, reflections that showed more bays extending into the distance. That's when Lisa Park arrived with her specialized transport delivery. Lisa was a 35-year-old driver who handled sensitive cargo medical equipment, laboratory instruments, anything requiring climate control and careful handling. She'd been making deliveries for 8 years and had an impeccable record for on-time performance and cargo protection. When she arrived at Meridian on a Tuesday evening in late April, she was carrying a shipment of electron microscopes destined for a research facility at UC Davis. Lisa's delivery was assigned to Bay 36, a standard assignment that should have been straightforward. I watched on the security cameras as she backed her truck up to the dock, then walked inside to find the receiving supervisor and complete her paperwork. Normal procedure, nothing unusual. But Lisa didn't come back to her truck. After an hour, the receiving supervisor asked me to help locate her. We walked through the loading dock together, calling her name, checking all 48 bays. No sign of Lisa Park. Her truck was still positioned at Bay 36, cargo doors open, but the driver had vanished. I checked the surveillance footage, running it back to trace Lisa's movements. The cameras showed her entering the loading dock area, walking past Bay 20, Bay 25, Bay 30. Then she continued past Bay 48, the end of the building, and kept walking. The footage showed her moving alongside bays 49, 50, 51, continuing down a loading dock that extended far beyond the physical structure of our building. But when I walked to Bay 48 and looked beyond it, I saw only the concrete wall and the parking lot outside. No additional bays, no extended dock, no Lisa Park. We called the police, filed a missing person report, searched the entire facility with dogs. Lisa Park had simply disappeared while walking down a loading dock that was simultaneously finite and infinite, depending on who was looking at it. 3 days later, our night shift supervisor found her. She was sitting on the dock edge beside Bay 847, legs dangling over the side, staring at a delivery schedule that showed her arrival time as several years in the past. When the supervisor approached her, Lisa looked up with eyes that held too much weariness for someone who'd been missing for only 3 days. "I found my bay," she said, voice hoarse from exhaustion. "Bay 36. But every time I turned around to walk back, there were more bays. Hundreds of them. All identical, all empty, all numbered consecutively. I've been walking for years, trying to find the end." The supervisor brought Lisa to the security office, where I could see immediately that something was wrong. She looked older, not dramatically, but noticeably. Her hair showed more gray, her face more lines, her hands the wear patterns of someone who'd been walking for much longer than 3 days. When I asked her about the time she'd been missing, Lisa insisted she'd been in the loading dock for 3 or 4 years, maybe longer. "The bays all look exactly the same," she explained, voice distant and disconnected. "Same concrete, same dock levelers, same overhead doors. The numbers just keep going up. 600, 700, 800. I passed bay 1000 twice. But when I looked back, it showed a different number, like the dock was rearranging itself as I walked." Lisa described finding other drivers during her journey, truckers who'd been walking the infinite dock for what felt like decades, all trying to find their way back to bay assignments that seemed to exist in a reality adjacent to our own. They'd formed small groups, sharing information about which bay numbers led to dead ends, which routes seemed to circle back on themselves, which areas of the dock showed signs of other people who'd passed through years earlier. "The dock extends in both directions," Lisa continued. "Past bay 1 on the left, the numbers go negative. Bay -50, -200. And past the highest positive numbers, there are bays with no numbers at all, just symbols that hurt to look at directly." Medical examination showed Lisa suffering from severe dehydration and exhaustion, consistent with walking for days without rest. But her shoes showed wear patterns that suggested much longer travel, and soil samples from the treads contained concrete dust that didn't match anything in our facility. Older concrete with mineral compositions that placed it decades in the past. The receiving supervisor found Lisa's original delivery paperwork at Bay 36, time-stamped with her arrival 3 days earlier. But Lisa insisted she'd delivered the electron microscopes years ago to researchers who said they'd been waiting for the shipment since the 1980s. We never found any record of the electron microscopes Lisa claimed to have delivered. The cargo she'd been carrying remained in her truck, seals intact, exactly as it had been when she first arrived. But hidden behind the legitimate cargo, we discovered something that shouldn't have been there. Delivery receipts signed by people who died years before Lisa was born, for equipment that wouldn't be invented for decades to come. I transferred to a different facility 2 months later, but sometimes when I'm working late shifts in other warehouses, I catch myself counting loading bays obsessively, making sure the numbers end where they're supposed to end. Because I know that somewhere in Bakersfield, there's a loading dock that extends further than any building should, where time moves differently and deliveries can arrive before they're shipped, where drivers walk forever through identical bays, trying to find their way back to a reality that exists only at Bay 48 and below. Some places pull you down deeper than gravity alone can explain. I'm Sandra Walsh, and I've been managing the Continental Divide truck stop on Interstate 70 for 8 years. We're positioned at 11,000 feet elevation, just 5 miles from the Eisenhower Tunnel approach, where the highway cuts through the heart of the Rocky Mountains. During winter, we're a lifeline for truckers, facing some of the most treacherous driving conditions in North America: black ice, whiteout conditions, and grades steep enough to burn out brakes in minutes. The truck stop serves as a mandatory chain-up area during winter storms, with space for 200 vehicles and heated buildings where drivers can wait out the worst weather. My job involves coordinating with the Colorado Department of Transportation, managing fuel deliveries at altitude, and ensuring that truckers have safe haven when mountain conditions become impassable. The work requires constant vigilance about weather patterns, road conditions, and the unique challenges of operating a facility where altitude affects everything from engine performance to human endurance. Most of our customers are experienced mountain drivers who understand the dangers of high-altitude trucking. They know to check tire pressure, monitor engine temperatures, and respect the power of sudden weather changes that can turn a clear day into a blizzard without warning. These professionals depend on our facility for fuel, food, and information that can mean the difference between safe passage and catastrophe. But in February of 2024, our parking lot started presenting a danger that no amount of mountain driving experience could prepare anyone for. It began with drivers complaining about soft asphalt in certain parking spaces. Truckers would park for their mandatory rest periods and return to find their rigs sitting lower than when they'd left them, as if the pavement had compressed under the weight. Initial inspections showed nothing unusual. The asphalt was properly laid, adequately supported, and showed no signs of structural failure or subsidence. The complaints persisted and grew more specific. Drivers reported that their trucks seemed to be sinking into the pavement at a rate of about an inch per hour in certain spaces, particularly in the northeast section of the lot. I had the area inspected by highway engineers who found the pavement structurally sound and the underlying ground stable. They suggested the reports might be related to altitude-induced hallucinations or equipment malfunction caused by the extreme elevation, but I started monitoring the northeast section more carefully, and what I observed defied every engineering principle I understood. Trucks parked in specific spaces would gradually settle into the asphalt as if the solid pavement were becoming liquid. The process was slow, almost imperceptible, but after several hours, the effect was undeniable. Vehicles that had arrived at normal ground level would be sitting several inches below the surrounding pavement surface. The strangest part was that the asphalt around the affected vehicles remained solid. Other trucks could park immediately adjacent to a sinking rig without experiencing any unusual settling. It was as if the phenomenon affected individual vehicles rather than the pavement itself, as if something was selectively pulling specific trucks downward through matter that should have been impenetrable. Drivers whose trucks were affected described a sensation of heaviness that went beyond normal vehicle weight. They reported feeling pressed into their seats, as if gravity in their immediate area had intensified. Some mentioned hearing creaking sounds from their trailers, metal stress noises that suggested structural forces exceeding normal loading parameters. That's when Michael O'Brien arrived during a February snowstorm. Michael was a legend among mountain drivers, 48 years old, 25 years of high-altitude trucking experience, and a reputation for getting through conditions that defeated less experienced drivers. He specialized in emergency deliveries to mountain communities, carrying medical supplies, heating fuel, and essential goods to locations that became inaccessible during severe weather. When Michael's rig appeared in our lot during a whiteout blizzard, other drivers felt safer just knowing he was there. He parked in space 17 in the northeast section, positioning his truck for a quick departure when the storm cleared. Standard procedure for an experienced driver who understood that weather windows in the mountains could open and close without warning. Michael came into the main building to file his weather report and check road conditions, planning to catch a few hours of sleep before making his run to a snowed-in medical facility in Vail. That was at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. By midnight, Space 17 was empty, except for what looked like a slight depression in the asphalt. I found Michael's truck by accident while doing my routine midnight security check. What I saw made me question my own sanity. Space 17 appeared empty from a distance, but as I approached, I realized I was looking at the roof of Michael's cab, now level with the surrounding pavement. His entire rig had sunk into the asphalt until only the top few inches were visible. I could hear his engine idling below ground level. The CB radio antenna was still above the surface, and when I keyed my handheld radio to his frequency, Michael's voice came through clearly. "Sandra, this is strange. My trailer seems to be falling up through the earth. I can see dirt and rock layers passing by my windows, but they're moving upward instead of me moving down. Michael, can you get out of your truck? Negative. Tried opening the door, but there's solid earth pressed against it. Windows too. It's like I'm buried, but I can still see the surface above me getting further away. And Sandra, the crazy part is I'm not falling. The earth is rising past me like I'm stationary and the world is moving up. I watched in horror as the antenna slowly disappeared below the asphalt surface. Michael's transmissions continued, growing fainter, but still audible. I'm passing through different rock layers now. Sedimentary, then granite, then something that looks volcanic. But I'm not moving. The geology is flowing upward around my truck like water. Michael, we're getting heavy equipment to dig you out. Don't think digging will help, Sandra. I'm about 50 feet below the surface now, but my altimeter still shows 11,000 feet elevation. It's like I'm falling through the earth without actually changing altitude. The rock layers keep flowing upward past my windows, but my GPS says I haven't moved from space 17. The transmissions became increasingly surreal. Michael described passing through underground rivers that flowed upward, caverns filled with inverted stalactites that pointed down into deeper earth, and geological formations that seemed to exist in defiance of physics. He maintained his professional composure, providing detailed reports of his descent as if documenting a routine delivery to an impossible destination. I'm seeing other vehicles down here, Michael reported after what felt like hours. Trucks, cars, even what looks like old wagons, all sinking upward through the earth at different rates. Some of the drivers are still in their vehicles, but they look like they've been traveling for years, decades maybe. His final clear transmission came just before dawn. Sandra, I think I understand now. This isn't falling. It's being pulled. Something deep in the earth is drawing vehicles down, but only certain ones. Only the ones that belong to drivers who've spent too much time in the mountains, who've become too attached to the high places. It wants us to keep going deeper, to find out what's at the bottom of the gravity well. Static replaced Michael's voice. When the road crews arrived with heavy equipment, they found Space 17 covered with normal asphalt, showing no signs of disturbance. Ground-penetrating radar detected no cavities, no buried vehicles, nothing but solid earth extending down to bedrock. But sometimes, late at night when the wind is howling down from the Continental Divide, I still pick up transmissions on Michael's CB frequency. His voice, fainter each time, reporting his position as he continues falling upward through the earth. A mountain driver who finally found a route that leads to the center of the world, where gravity pulls in directions that don't exist on any map. Some convoys travel roads that don't appear on any map. I'm Walter Fleming, and I've been working CB radio relay for the Arizona Department of Transportation for 10 years. My station monitors Interstate 40 through the Painted Desert, where the highway cuts across 100 miles of red rock formations and ancient mesas that stretch to every horizon. It's some of the most isolated country in the Southwest, where cell phone towers are scarce and CB radio remains the primary communication link for long-haul truckers crossing between Flagstaff and the New Mexico border. The Painted Desert is unforgiving territory for truckers' extreme temperature swings, sudden sandstorms that reduce visibility to zero, and wind that can blow a loaded trailer off the road without warning. During monsoon season, flash floods can turn dry washes into raging torrents in minutes. My job involves relaying weather updates, coordinating emergency responses, and maintaining contact with drivers who might go hours without seeing another vehicle. Most truckers who run the Painted Desert route are experienced desert drivers who understand the dangers of the terrain. They know to carry extra water, monitor weather conditions obsessively, and never underestimate the power of a sandstorm to disorient even veteran drivers. The desert has a way of making experienced professionals feel like beginners, humbling anyone who thinks they've seen everything the road can offer. But in May of 2024, drivers started reporting encounters with other truckers who seemed to know secrets about navigating the desert that shouldn't have been possible to learn. The first reports came from Randy Mitchell, running furniture from Phoenix to Albuquerque. His transmission was puzzled, but not alarmed. Relay, this is strange, but I just joined up with a convoy of older trucks. 4 or 5 rigs, all vintage models, old Kenworths and Peterbilts from maybe the 70s or 80s. They're running in perfect formation, maintaining ideal spacing for fuel efficiency. These guys know something about desert driving I've never seen before. I asked Randy for more details. The convoy was maintaining CB silence except for essential communications in what sounded like old trucker codes I hadn't heard in years. They were taking routes that didn't match his GPS but somehow kept them moving faster than the main highway. Most importantly, they seemed to know exactly when and where sandstorms would develop, adjusting their path hours before weather services detected any atmospheric disturbances. They're running without lights, Randy reported. Full daylight but no headlights, no marker lights, nothing. And DOT relay, this might sound crazy, but I can see them clearly in my mirrors, but when I look directly out my side windows, they're harder to make out. Like they're more real in reflection than they are straight on. Over the next 2 weeks, 6 more drivers reported similar encounters. Vintage truck convoys that appeared in mirrors with crystal clarity, but seemed insubstantial when viewed directly. The trucks cast no shadows despite bright desert sunshine, and when drivers tried to follow their routes on foot during rest stops, they found no tire tracks in the sand, just the wind-carved patterns that had been there for decades. The convoy drivers never responded to direct CB communication, but truckers who followed them reported reaching their destinations hours ahead of schedule, taking routes through terrain that should have been impassable for commercial vehicles. Some claimed the convoy led them through sandstorms that never touched their trucks, creating corridors of clear air through weather systems that satellite imagery showed as solid dust clouds. That's when Carol Stevens encountered the convoy during a late May sandstorm. Carol was a 41-year-old independent trucker with 15 years of desert experience, hauling electronics from Los Angeles to Dallas. She'd run the painted desert route dozens of times and knew every truck stop, every safe pullout, every warning sign that preceded dangerous weather. When a massive sandstorm developed west of Holbrook, Carol was prepared to find shelter and wait it out. Her first transmission came at 4:30 p.m. Relay, I'm westbound, mile marker 238, seeing a serious dust wall building to the south. Visibility dropping fast, looking for a safe place to park until this blows through. Standard procedure. Carol was experienced enough to recognize when conditions were becoming too dangerous for safe travel. But 15 minutes later, her transmission had changed. Relay, disregard my last. I've made contact with a convoy that knows a way through this storm. 4 vintage rigs running in tight formation. They're signaling for me to follow them off the main highway. Carol, I don't recommend leaving the interstate during storm conditions. Better to wait it out at a truck stop. These drivers know what they're doing, DOT relay. They're taking a route that keeps us ahead of the storm front. I can see clear air where they're leading, even though the satellite shows solid dust coverage. They're running some kind of path that the sandstorm can't touch. For the next hour, Carol provided updates as she followed the convoy across terrain that shouldn't have been accessible to commercial vehicles. According to her GPS, she was driving through areas marked as wilderness, across washes and mesas that had no roads. But her transmissions described a clear path, well-maintained surfaces, and perfect visibility, while satellite imagery showed her position completely obscured by dust storms. Relay, this is incredible. The convoy is leading me through landscape I've never seen before. Red rock formations that aren't on any map. Mesas carved with symbols that look ancient but somehow familiar. The lead truck keeps flashing his lights in patterns, like he's communicating with something up ahead. Carol, What's your current GPS position? That's the strange part. GPS shows me in the middle of wilderness, but I'm driving on perfectly smooth pavement. The convoy knows roads that don't exist on any chart. And DOT relay, I'm starting to see other trucks up ahead. Lots of them, parked in formations around what looks like a massive loading dock built into the side of a mesa. Carol's voice took on a dreamlike quality as she described arriving at what she called the place where all the lost loads end up. According to her transmission, the convoy had led her to a facility that existed in a pocket of calm air within the sandstorm, where hundreds of vintage trucks were parked around loading docks carved directly into red rock formations. There are trailers here from decades past, Carol reported. Cargo that was reported lost in storms, accidents, breakdowns that left loads scattered across the desert. But it's all here, perfectly preserved, waiting to be delivered to destinations that might not exist anymore. The convoy drivers are unloading my electronics, adding them to cargo bays that stretch back into the mesa forever. Carol, you need to return to the main highway immediately. I don't think that's possible, DOT relay. The convoy drivers are explaining the rules now. Once you find this place, once you see where the lost loads go, you become part of the operation. There are drivers here who've been making deliveries for 50 years, carrying cargo between the real world and this place where all the missing shipments wait for pickup. Her final transmission was barely audible through increasing static. Dot relay. I understand now. The desert doesn't lose cargo. It collects it. Every load that disappears in a sandstorm, every trailer that vanishes in an accident, it all comes here, eventually. And the drivers, we become part of the convoy, helping new arrivals find their way to the place where time doesn't matter, and every delivery can finally be completed. Static replaced Carol's voice. Search and rescue teams found her truck 3 days later, parked normally at a rest stop west of Holbrook. The trailer was empty, electronics gone without a trace. Carol was nowhere to be found, but her logbook contained delivery receipts for cargo shipments to addresses that had been abandoned for decades, signed by consignees who'd been dead for years. Sometimes, when sandstorms sweep across the painted desert, drivers report seeing convoy lights in their mirrors, vintage trucks running in perfect formation, leading the way to destinations that exist only in the spaces between the real world and the place where all lost things eventually find their way home. Some checkpoints never let you finish crossing them. I'm Diane Foster, and I've been working the administrative office for the West Virginia Department of Transportation Inspection Station on Interstate 77 for 6 years. Our facility sits in the heart of the New River Gorge, where the highway winds through some of the most spectacular and challenging terrain in Appalachia. The gorge cuts 1,000 feet deep through ancient rock, creating a natural bottleneck that makes our station a critical checkpoint for commercial vehicles traveling between Virginia and Ohio. The inspection station operates around the clock, checking commercial vehicles for safety, compliance, weight limits, and proper documentation. We see everything from local delivery trucks to transcontinental freight haulers, and our inspectors are trained to spot mechanical problems that could cause catastrophic failures on the steep grades and sharp curves that characterize mountain driving. The work is routine but essential, catching brake problems, tire defects, or cargo securement issues before they can cause accidents on roads where a mechanical failure can mean a 1,000-foot drop into the gorge. Inspector Raymond Koch has worked our station longer than anyone. 12 years of methodical, thorough safety inspections that have earned him recognition throughout the state DOT system. Raymond operates with clockwork precision, conducting each inspection according to strict protocols that ensure nothing gets overlooked. Drivers respect his professionalism and attention to detail, even when his thoroughness delays their schedules. But in August of 2024, I started noticing that Raymond's inspections were becoming too precise, too identical, following patterns that suggested something beyond normal professional routine. It began with timing discrepancies in our log system. Raymond's inspections, which typically varied in duration depending on vehicle type and condition, suddenly became uniform in length. Every inspection took exactly 47 minutes, regardless of whether he was checking a small delivery truck or a fully loaded tractor-trailer. The consistency was remarkable, not 46 minutes, not 48, but exactly 47 minutes from the moment a vehicle entered the inspection bay until Raymond cleared it for departure. I initially attributed this to Raymond perfecting his procedures, developing an efficient routine that maximized thoroughness while minimizing delays. Experienced inspectors often develop timing patterns as they become more skilled at their work. But when I reviewed surveillance footage from the inspection bay, I noticed something that troubled me deeply. Raymond was conducting identical inspections on different vehicles. Not similar procedures, but identical movements, identical checks, identical documentation patterns. He would walk around each truck in exactly the same sequence, check the same components in the same order, write notes in his clipboard at precisely the same intervals. When reviewing hours of footage, it looked like someone had edited the same 47-minute inspection sequence and overlaid it on different trucks. More disturbing was Raymond's interaction with drivers. He asked each driver the same questions in the same sequence, using identical phrasing and waiting for identical response times before moving to the next question. When drivers gave unexpected answers or asked for clarification, Raymond would pause for exactly 15 seconds, then continue, as if the deviation had never occurred. The drivers didn't seem to notice anything unusual. They answered Raymond's questions, submitted their documentation, and waited patiently for clearance. But when I checked our computer logs, many of these drivers had been through Raymond's inspection before, some within the same week, some multiple times in a single day. Yet Raymond showed no recognition of repeat visitors, treating each encounter as if it were the first time he'd ever seen the driver or vehicle. That's when Frank DeLuca started coming through our station with disturbing frequency. Frank was a 59-year-old veteran trucker nearing retirement, hauling automotive parts between plants in the Carolinas and assembly facilities in Ohio. He'd been running this route for 15 years and had passed through our inspection station dozens of times. Frank was known for his meticulous record-keeping and his respect for DOT regulations, the kind of driver who never caused problems and always had his paperwork in perfect order. Frank's first inspection with Raymond that August seemed routine. 47 minutes of standard procedures, clean bill of health for his truck, polite interaction with no complications. But 3 days later, Frank came through again with the same cargo, same route, same truck. Raymond conducted an identical inspection, asking the same questions, checking the same components, taking exactly 47 minutes to complete procedures that should have been abbreviated for a recently inspected vehicle. When I checked Frank's electronic logs, they showed he'd been traveling continuously between the two plants, making the same delivery run over and over without variation. His pickup times, delivery times, and route selections were identical to the minute. It was as if Frank had become trapped in a cycle of making the same trip repeatedly, unable to break free from a pattern that existed only in the space between our inspection station and his destination. Over the following weeks, Frank's appearances at our station became more frequent and more troubling. He would arrive every 2 to 3 days, sometimes twice in a single day, always carrying the same automotive part shipment, always receiving an identical 47-minute inspection from Raymond. But Frank was changing, with each visit aging visibly, developing lines and gray hair that accumulated faster than time should allow. By September, Frank looked like he'd aged years in the span of weeks. His hair had gone completely white, his face deeply lined, his movements those of a much older man. But his electronic logs showed only routine travel between pickup and delivery points, with no missing time or unexplained delays. According to official records, Frank was maintaining his normal schedule, while somehow experiencing accelerated aging that left him looking decades older than his chronological age. The most disturbing discovery came when I reviewed Frank's physical logbook. While his electronic records showed normal operations, his handwritten log contained thousands of entries documenting identical inspections at our station. Page after page of inspection records, all showing the same date, same time, same inspector comments, same vehicle condition reports. Frank had been documenting the same 47-minute inspection over and over, apparently for years, though the electronic timeline suggested only weeks had passed. In his own handwriting, Frank had recorded interactions with Raymond that followed precisely the same script each time. Question about cargo manifest, check of brake systems, review of driver logs, verification of permits. Identical conversations repeated thousands of times, with Frank apparently unaware that he was reliving the same inspection in an endless cycle that aged him, while leaving no trace in official DOT records. The final entry in Frank's logbook was different from the others. Instead of the standard inspection notes, he'd written, "I understand now. The inspector isn't checking my truck, he's checking my time. Every 47 minutes, I go back to the beginning, but I get older while everything else stays the same. I can't remember when I started making this delivery, but I can't remember making any other delivery either. There's only the road to the station, the inspection, the road to the destination that I never reach, and the road back to start again." We found Frank in his cab at the end of that shift, appearing to be in his 80s despite being 59 years old. He was conscious but disoriented, insisting that he'd been making the same delivery for decades and asking when Inspector Koch would clear him for departure. Frank's truck contained automotive parts with shipping dates spanning 30 years, though his electronic logs showed normal current date operations. Inspector Raymond Koch had no memory of Frank DeLuca and no record of conducting repetitive inspections. When we reviewed Raymond's inspection logs, they showed normal variety in vehicles, times, and procedures. But the surveillance footage told a different story. Hours of identical 47-minute sequences with Raymond conducting the same inspection on different trucks. Aging drivers who returned again and again to relive the same checkpoint that never quite let them pass through to their destinations. I transferred to a different DOT facility 3 months later. But sometimes I wonder about drivers who get caught in checkpoints that check more than vehicle safety places, where time moves in circles and inspections become prisons that age you, while keeping you forever on the same road to the same destination you can never quite reach. Empty trailers aren't supposed to carry voices from places they've never been. I'm Kenneth Hartwell, and I've been working night security at Delta Cross Distribution Center outside Memphis for 8 years. The facility handles electronics shipments moving between manufacturing plants and retail distribution networks across the Southeast. During peak season, we process thousands of packages, daily computers, televisions, smartphones, and specialized equipment that requires climate-controlled storage and careful handling during transport. My shift runs from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., when the facility operates with minimal staff and maximum automation. Most of my work involves monitoring security cameras, checking door locks, and ensuring that the climate control systems maintain proper temperatures for sensitive electronic cargo. The building covers 400,000 square feet, with dozens of loading bays and storage areas that can feel maze-like during the quiet overnight hours when only essential systems remain active. The work is routine most nights, walking predetermined security routes, logging temperatures, responding to occasional equipment alarms that rarely indicate serious problems. The building's age and size create normal settling noises, HVAC sounds, and the occasional creak that comes with industrial construction. After 8 years, I've learned to distinguish between normal operational sounds and genuine problems that require attention. But in October of 2024, I started hearing sounds that didn't fit any category. I recognized voices coming from empty cargo bays where no people should have been present. It began in Bay 12, a loading dock that had been temporarily closed after a forklift accident damaged the hydraulic dock leveler. The bay was empty except for a single 53-foot trailer that had been parked there for repairs after developing brake problems during unloading. The trailer was completely empty, cargo doors sealed, and no personnel were authorized to access the area during overnight hours. But during my 2 a.m. security rounds, I heard voices coming from inside the sealed trailer. Not loud conversation, but whispered discussions that carried through the thin aluminum walls. The voices were discussing delivery schedules, route optimizations, and cargo manifests, typical trucker conversation, but coming from a trailer that contained nothing but empty space. I checked the security logs and camera footage. No one had entered Bay 12 during my shift. The trailer's doors remained sealed exactly as they'd been during the previous day's maintenance inspection. But the whispered conversations continued intermittently throughout the night, always discussing the same topics: electronics, deliveries to retail chains, schedule pressures, concerns about cargo security during transport. The voices were too indistinct to identify, but they carried the cadence and terminology of experienced truck drivers. I could make out fragments about tight delivery windows, signature-required packages, and temperature-sensitive components. Standard industry conversation, but impossible, given that the trailer was verified empty and sealed. Over the following weeks, the whispered conversations became more frequent and more distinct. I started recognizing individual voices, different drivers discussing their experiences with electronics transport, comparing notes about difficult deliveries, sharing concerns about cargo that had gone missing during transport. The conversations felt like radio chatter from truckers comparing their experiences, except they were coming from inside an empty trailer that couldn't possibly contain any people. More troubling was the content of these discussions. The drivers were talking about deliveries that had never been completed, shipments that had disappeared in transit, cargo that had arrived at destinations without the drivers who were supposed to deliver them. They discussed electronics loads that had vanished along with their transport teams, leaving only empty trailers and unanswered questions about where the drivers had gone. That's when Rachel Kim arrived for her scheduled pickup from Bay 12. Rachel was a 32-year-old team driver who specialized in high-value electronics transport. She and her partner ran a small but successful operation handling sensitive cargo that required specialized security protocols and precise delivery timing. Rachel had an excellent reputation for reliability and had been making deliveries to our facility for 3 years without any incidents or complications. She arrived at 11:30 p.m. to pick up a load of laptop computers destined for retail stores across Alabama and Mississippi. Standard cargo, routine delivery schedule, nothing unusual about the assignment. But when Rachel backed her truck up to Bay 12, she immediately noticed something wrong. "Security. This is strange," Rachel called over her radio. "I can hear voices coming from inside this trailer. Sounds like other drivers talking about electronics deliveries. But the manifest shows this bay is supposed to be empty." I met Rachel at Bay 12 to investigate. Together, we could clearly hear multiple voices inside the sealed trailer, engaged in what sounded like a team meeting about delivery coordination. The conversations were detailed and professional, discussing specific delivery addresses, security protocols for high-value cargo, and timing requirements for temperature-sensitive electronics. Rachel recognized some of the voices. "That sounds like Mike Torres," she said, identifying one of the speakers. "He and his partner handle electronics runs between here and Florida. But Mike's been missing for 2 weeks. His truck was found empty at a rest stop in Georgia. No sign of him or his cargo." As we listened, Rachel identified other voices, drivers who had disappeared while hauling electronics loads, similar to her own assignment. Tommy Chen, who'd vanished with a shipment of tablets. Maria Rodriguez, who'd been missing since August, along with her cargo of gaming systems. Kevin Washington, whose truck had been discovered abandoned with no trace of him or the smartphones he'd been transporting. "They're all in there," Rachel whispered. "Every driver who's gone missing while hauling electronics from this facility. They're discussing their deliveries like they're still making them, comparing routes and sharing information about cargo that disappeared with them." I tried to convince Rachel to wait for daylight and additional personnel before investigating further, but her professional curiosity overcame caution. "These are my colleagues," she said. "If they're somehow trapped in there, I need to help them." Rachel opened the trailer doors herself, despite my protests. The trailer was completely empty, no cargo, no people, no evidence that anyone had ever been inside. But the voices continued, now clearly audible in the open air, emanating from the empty cargo space as if invisible speakers were positioned throughout the trailer. "Rachel," one of the voices called out, "you made it. We've been waiting for you to join the permanent delivery route." Rachel stepped into the empty trailer, and the voices welcomed her with familiarity that suggested they'd been expecting her arrival. They discussed her delivery history, her reputation for reliable service, and her expertise with electronics transport. But they also talked about deliveries she'd never made, routes she'd never driven, cargo she'd never handled, destinations she'd never reached. "We've got your complete delivery record here," Mike Torres's voice explained. "Every shipment you should have hauled, every route you were supposed to run, every delivery you never got the chance to make. Time works differently in the cargo space. We can complete all the deliveries we never finished, serve all the customers we never reached." I tried to enter the trailer to bring Rachel back, but she'd moved deeper into the empty space, following voices that seemed to originate from everywhere and nowhere. The trailer appeared empty from outside, but Rachel was responding to conversations and interactions that I couldn't see or hear clearly. "It's incredible," Rachel called back to me. "The trailer contains every delivery I've ever imagined making. All the electronics I could have transported, all the routes I could have driven, all the customers I could have served. The missing drivers aren't gone. They're making deliveries in parallel routes that exist alongside our normal reality." Rachel's voice began to fade as she moved further into the trailer, though the space couldn't have been more than 53 feet deep. "Tell my partner I found the lost shipments," she called. "Tell him the drivers are still making their deliveries, just on routes that don't exist on any map." When daylight came, we found Rachel's truck backed up to Bay 12, cargo doors open, the trailer apparently empty, but Rachel was gone, and her voice had joined the whispered conversations that continued to emanate from the empty space. Her radio was still transmitting, reporting delivery progress on routes that led to customers in cities that didn't exist, carrying electronics that had never been manufactured. The facility sealed Bay 12 permanently after that incident, but sometimes during quiet nights, security guards report hearing voices from other empty trailers, drivers discussing deliveries they never completed, comparing notes about cargo that exists only in the spaces between departure and arrival, where missing drivers continue their routes in a logistics network that operates parallel to the one visible in our reality. Some storms never finish what they started decades ago. I'm Margaret Sullivan, and I've been working weather monitoring for the Kansas Highway Patrol for 11 years. My station covers Interstate 35 through the heart of Tornado Alley, where the highway cuts across open prairie that can spawn some of the most violent weather systems in North America. During storm season, I coordinate with the National Weather Service, track severe weather developments, and provide critical information to truckers and emergency responders, navigating conditions that can change from clear skies to life-threatening in minutes. The work requires constant attention to atmospheric data, radar patterns, and communication with drivers who depend on accurate weather information to make decisions about route timing and safe shelter. Tornado Alley doesn't forgive mistakes. A missed warning or delayed evacuation order can mean the difference between safety and catastrophe for travelers caught in the open during severe weather events. Most storms in our area follow predictable patterns, moving generally northeast with the jet stream, and producing weather phenomena that we can track and forecast with reasonable accuracy. Even the most severe storms typically last a few hours at most, clearing the area as atmospheric conditions change. But there's one weather system that doesn't follow normal patterns, doesn't move with prevailing winds, and doesn't dissipate according to any meteorological principles I understand. The static storm, as truckers have named it, appears along a 30-mile stretch of I-35 between mile markers 140 and 170. It's not visible on weather radar, doesn't show up on satellite imagery, and produces no measurable precipitation or wind speed. But drivers report encountering intense electrical activity, constant lightning, and radio interference that makes normal communication impossible. The first reports came in March of 2024 from experienced drivers who insisted they'd driven through a severe electrical storm that didn't appear on any weather monitoring equipment. These weren't novice truckers prone to exaggeration. They were veterans with decades of experience navigating Great Plains weather, drivers who understood the difference between normal storms and atmospheric anomalies. The reports were remarkably consistent. Drivers described entering a zone of continuous lightning activity that followed their vehicles for the entire 30-mile stretch, maintaining constant intensity regardless of driving speed or route changes. The electrical activity was accompanied by radio interference that caused CB radios to pick up transmissions from what sounded like other truckers, but using outdated terminology and discussing routes that hadn't existed for decades. More troubling was the temporal confusion experienced by drivers who encountered the static storm. They reported entering the electrical activity during daylight hours and emerging in darkness, or vice versa, with no memory of the intervening time. Electronic logs showed normal travel times, but drivers insisted they'd been driving through the storm for much longer than the recorded duration. The phenomenon intensified through the spring, with more frequent reports of radio transmissions from drivers who claimed to be hauling cargo types that were no longer transported, using CB channels that had been reassigned years earlier, and discussing weather conditions that didn't match current atmospheric data. That's when Thomas Briggs encountered the static storm on a Tuesday evening in late April. Thomas was a 46-year-old veteran driver with 22 years of experience navigating severe weather across the Midwest. He specialized in time-sensitive deliveries during storm season, when other drivers would shelter and wait for conditions to improve. Thomas had an almost supernatural ability to read weather patterns and find safe corridors through dangerous atmospheric conditions. His last normal communication came at 6:15 p.m. Highway Patrol. This is Thomas in the Blue Peterbilt, southbound mile marker 145. I'm seeing some unusual electrical activity ahead, but radars showing clear skies. Requesting current weather status for this section. I checked all available weather data. No storms, no electrical activity, no atmospheric disturbances anywhere in his area. Thomas, we're showing clear conditions for your entire route. No weather advisories in effect. Copy that. But I'm definitely seeing lightning ahead. Constant activity. Like the storm is sitting stationary across the highway, and my radio's picking up some strange chatter. Sounds like other drivers, but they're discussing routes that don't exist anymore and using old-style CB protocols. As Thomas approached mile marker 150, his transmissions became increasingly concerned. Highway Patrol. The electrical activity is intensifying. Lightning strikes every few seconds, but there's no thunder, no wind, no rain, just continuous electrical discharge. And the radio chatter. I'm hearing voices I recognize. Thomas, can you identify the voices? Long pause, filled with static. When Thomas's voice returned, it was shaking. One of them sounds like my father, but my father died 15 years ago. He was a trucker, used to run this same route in the 1980s. I'm hearing his voice clear as day, calling my handle, asking me to join his convoy. Thomas, recommend you exit at the next available interchange and wait for conditions to improve. Can't do that. My father's calling for me specifically. Says he's been waiting for me to join the permanent run, the route that never ends. He's explaining how the static storm works, how it collects drivers who belong on the road, who can't imagine doing anything else. Once you drive into it, you become part of the electrical activity, your voice joining the radio chatter that guides other drivers home. Thomas's transmissions became increasingly distant, overlaid with static that carried other voices. I could hear fragments of conversations from what sounded like dozens of truckers, all discussing weather conditions, route changes, and convoy formations. But the terminology was decades out of date, and the routes they mentioned had been discontinued before I started working for the Highway Patrol. Highway Patrol, I can see them now, Thomas reported. Trucks from different eras, all driving through the electrical storm. My father's rig is right there, a 1979 Kenworth he used to haul grain through Tornado Alley. He's signaling for me to fall in behind him. Join the convoy that's been running this route since before I was born. Thomas, do not follow any other vehicles. Exit the area immediately. Too late. I'm already part of the convoy now. We're driving through lightning that doesn't strike the ground, following storm systems that have been rotating through this section for decades. The static storm doesn't dissipate. It accumulates energy from every driver who's ever run this route, collecting voices and experiences from truckers who understood that some roads never let you stop driving them. Static consumed Thomas's transmissions. When it cleared 3 minutes later, I heard only the background chatter of multiple voices discussing weather patterns, convoy formations, and delivery schedules, using CB terminology from the 1970s and 80s. Thomas's voice had joined the chorus, reporting road conditions and coordinating with other drivers who existed only as electrical impulses in a storm that had been building for decades. We lost all contact with Thomas for 72 hours. Search and rescue found his truck parked at a rest stop south of the static storm corridor, engine running, electronic logs showing normal travel time for the 30-mile section. Thomas was in his cab, conscious but disoriented, with no memory of the missing time. Medical examination showed signs of electrical exposure, minor burns consistent with lightning proximity, temporary hearing loss, and neurological symptoms suggesting electromagnetic interference with brain function. But Thomas insisted he remembered nothing after entering the electrical activity until waking up at the rest stop. His CB radio continued receiving transmissions from the static storm for weeks after his return, voices of truckers from different decades, all coordinating convoy movements through electrical activity that exists only along those 30 miles of highway. Sometimes, Thomas's own voice can be heard among them, reporting weather conditions and discussing route optimization with drivers who've been running the same corridor since before he was born. I monitor that section more carefully now, but weather instruments still detect nothing unusual. The static storm exists only for drivers who recognize the voices calling them home, truckers who understand that some routes become permanent assignments, where the convoy never stops running, and the storm never finishes gathering the drivers it needs to keep the electrical pattern flowing through Tornado Alley forever. Some bridges cross more than the distance between two shores. I'm Vincent Carter, and I've been working emergency dispatch for Daggett County Sheriff's Department in northeastern Utah for 7 years. Highway 191 through the Flaming Gorge area is part of my coverage zone, where the road winds through red rock canyons and high desert terrain that can be spectacular and treacherous in equal measure. The route serves as a vital link between Wyoming and Utah, carrying both tourist traffic to recreational areas and commercial freight between regional distribution centers. The most challenging section of Highway 191 is the bridge crossing over Mirror Lake, where the road spans a quarter-mile of deep water that reflects the surrounding canyon walls and sky with extraordinary clarity. During calm weather, the lake's surface becomes so perfectly reflective that it's difficult to distinguish where the real landscape ends and the reflection begins. The phenomenon is stunning, but can be disorienting for drivers unfamiliar with the optical effects created by the pristine water. My job involves coordinating responses to traffic accidents, weather emergencies, and the occasional search and rescue operation in terrain where help can be hours away from the nearest populated area. The work requires familiarity with local geographic challenges and weather patterns that can change rapidly at altitude. Most calls are routine, but the remote location means that serious incidents can quickly become life-threatening without prompt emergency response. But in September of 2024, I started receiving calls about the Mirror Lake Bridge that described incidents I couldn't categorize or explain using standard emergency protocols. It began with drivers reporting severe disorientation while crossing the bridge during perfect weather conditions. Not typical vertigo or motion sickness, but complete spatial confusion about which direction was up and which was down. The lake's reflection was so perfect that drivers lost their sense of orientation, becoming unable to determine whether they were driving over water or under it. The first incident involved Janet Morrison, a tourist from Colorado who called 911 during her crossing. "I need help. I'm on the bridge over Mirror Lake, but I can't tell if I'm driving right side up or upside down. The reflection is so perfect that I don't know which way gravity is pulling. Everything looks exactly the same above and below." I guided Janet to continue driving slowly until she reached solid ground, where her disorientation immediately resolved. But her description troubled me. Janet was an experienced mountain driver who'd crossed numerous bridges in challenging conditions. For her to become completely spatially disoriented suggested something beyond normal optical illusion. Over the following weeks, similar calls increased in frequency. Drivers crossing during calm conditions, when the lake's surface was perfectly still, would experience complete loss of directional orientation. Some reported feeling like their vehicles were driving on the ceiling. Others described the sensation of falling upward while the bridge seemed to invert around them. More disturbing were reports from drivers who claimed to see other vehicles on the bridge simultaneously, above and below them. Trucks and cars reflected so perfectly in the lake that they appeared to be driving on both the bridge and the water's surface at the same time, creating the illusion of traffic flowing in multiple dimensions. That's when Patricia Gonzalez came through the area on her regular delivery route. Patricia was a 43-year-old professional driver with a perfect delivery record, hauling medical supplies between regional hospitals across Utah and Wyoming. She'd been making this run twice monthly for 8 years and had crossed the Mirror Lake Bridge dozens of times without incident. Patricia was known for her careful driving and thorough understanding of mountain route challenges. Her last normal communication came at 2:30 p.m. Dispatch: "This is Patricia, in the white Freightliner, approaching Mirror Lake Bridge eastbound. Weather's perfect, no traffic, should be across in a few minutes." Standard check-in. Patricia was maintaining her usual professional schedule and showing no signs of concern about road conditions. But 7 minutes later, her transmission was completely different. "Dispatch, I need assistance. I'm on the Mirror Lake Bridge, but something's wrong with gravity. I can't tell which way is up. My truck feels like it's driving on the water instead of over it." "Patricia, continue forward slowly. You're crossing a bridge, not driving on water. That's just it. I can see the bridge above me and below me. The reflection is so perfect that there are 2 bridges, 2 roads, 2 trucks. I don't know which one I'm driving." And dispatch: "The other truck looks exactly like mine, but it's driving upside down relative to my position." I tried to maintain radio contact while dispatching emergency services to the bridge. Patricia's transmissions became increasingly confused as she described seeing multiple versions of her own truck crossing the bridge simultaneously in different orientations. She reported feeling like gravity was pulling her in several directions at once, as if the perfect reflection had created multiple gravitational fields. Dispatch: "The reflection isn't just visual anymore. I can feel myself driving on the water's surface while simultaneously crossing the bridge above. It's like gravity turned inside out And now there are two realities running parallel to each other. Patricia's final coherent transmission came 8 minutes after she'd entered the bridge. I understand now. The reflection isn't showing what's above the water, it's showing what's below the bridge. I'm driving through both realities at the same time. The truck above is crossing the bridge, but the truck below is driving on the lake bottom. And dispatch, I think I'm becoming both of them. Static replaced Patricia's voice. When emergency services arrived at the Mirror Lake Bridge 20 minutes later, they found no trace of Patricia or her truck on the bridge itself. The roadway was clear, with no signs of an accident or mechanical breakdown. But diving teams discovered Patricia's Freightliner at the bottom of Mirror Lake, perfectly preserved as if it had driven straight down from the bridge into the deep water. The truck was intact, cargo undisturbed, but no sign of Patricia inside the cab. She was found 6 hours later by a helicopter search team, walking calmly on the surface of Mirror Lake, directly above her submerged truck. Not swimming, not floating, walking on the water, as if it were solid ground, leaving no ripples or disturbance in the lake's perfect reflection. When rescue teams approached by boat, Patricia appeared confused about their concern. "Why are you worried?" she asked. "I'm just finishing my delivery route. Gravity turned inside out while I was crossing the bridge, so now I drive on top of the water instead of above it. The truck below is making the same delivery in the other direction." Medical examination showed Patricia suffering from severe disorientation and symptoms consistent with prolonged submersion, despite being found walking on the water's surface. She insisted that she was simultaneously driving her truck at the bottom of the lake and walking her route on the surface, completing deliveries in both orientations of reality. Patricia's medical records showed she delivered her cargo to hospitals that existed only in the reflection mirror versions of real facilities that operated with reversed geography and inverted gravity. The delivery receipts in her logbook were signed by staff members whose names were backwards versions of real people, as if her entire route had been completed in a reality that existed only in the lake's perfect reflection. We never determined how Patricia's truck ended up at the bottom of Mirror Lake while she remained on the surface. The official report attributed the incident to disorientation and subsequent rescue from the water, but it couldn't explain how someone could walk on a lake's surface or complete deliveries to reflected versions of real destinations. Sometimes, when weather conditions create perfect reflections on Mirror Lake, drivers report seeing trucks crossing the bridge both above and below the water simultaneously. They describe watching vehicles drive normally on the bridge, while identical trucks move upside down on the lake bottom, as if the perfect reflection has created a parallel route where gravity operates in reverse and deliveries can be completed in both directions of reality at the same time. Some roads measure distance in the wrong direction. I'm Catherine Monroe, and I've been working traffic coordination for the Nevada Department of Transportation for 9 years. My section covers Interstate 80 through the 40-mile desert, one of the most desolate stretches of highway in the continental United States. The route crosses 100 miles of alkali flats and salt beds, where summer temperatures can exceed 120 degrees, and the nearest services are 50 miles apart in any direction. The work involves monitoring traffic flow, coordinating emergency responses, and maintaining communication with the few travelers brave enough to cross the desert during extreme weather conditions. The 40-mile desert earned its name from 19th century immigrants who faced a waterless crossing that killed livestock and sometimes entire families. Modern Interstate 80 follows roughly the same route, but air conditioning and reliable vehicles have made the crossing routine rather than life-threatening. Most drivers treat the 40-mile desert as an obstacle to endure rather than scenery to appreciate. The landscape is harsh and monotonous, endless expanses of gray-white earth, broken only by distant mountain ranges that shimmer in the heat like mirages. Mile markers provide the only reliable reference points in terrain so uniform that drivers can become disoriented even on a perfectly straight highway. But in November of 2024, those mile markers started providing reference points that didn't make sense according to any system of highway measurement I understood. It began with drivers reporting confusion about their progress through the desert. Professional truckers who'd made the crossing dozens of times suddenly couldn't determine their location using familiar landmarks. They'd pass mile marker 150, then encounter mile marker 149, then 148, as if the highway was counting backwards instead of forward. The first report came from Sandra Williams, hauling furniture from Reno to Salt Lake City. Traffic control. This is confusing, but I think there's an error with the mile markers through the desert. I've been driving east for 2 hours, but the numbers keep getting smaller instead of larger. I checked the highway maintenance records. No recent work on mile markers, no reported vandalism or damage. The markers should have been counting upward from west to east, following standard interstate numbering protocols that had been in place for decades. But Sandra's GPS tracking confirmed her position was advancing normally eastward, while she reported passing mile markers with decreasing numbers. Over the following week, 6 more drivers reported the same phenomenon. All experienced cross-country truckers, all familiar with the route, all insisting that mile markers were counting backwards along a stretch of highway where they'd always counted forward. More troubling was that drivers seemed to be losing speed as they encountered the reversed mile markers, gradually slowing from highway speed to a crawl despite maintaining normal throttle position. The phenomenon appeared to affect only eastbound traffic during certain atmospheric conditions. Westbound drivers reported normal mile marker progression and experienced no speed reduction. But eastbound vehicles entering the reverse section would begin losing velocity at mile marker 150, continuing to slow as the numbers decreased, until some drivers reported coming to a complete stop at mile marker 100. That's when Kevin Washington encountered the backwards mile markers during a cross-country haul. Kevin was a 37-year-old specialist in transcontinental freight, hauling electronics from California to distribution centers in the Midwest. He'd been making this run for 12 years and knew every mile of Interstate 80 from San Francisco to Chicago. When Kevin's voice came over the radio that Thursday afternoon, I could hear confusion that was unusual for such an experienced driver. Traffic control. This is Kevin in the red Kenworth, eastbound mile marker 155. Something strange is happening with my speed control. I've got my cruise set at 70, but my speedometer shows I'm slowing down without any throttle changes. Kevin, check your engine diagnostics. Might be a mechanical issue affecting power delivery. Negative on mechanical problems. Engine's running fine, all systems normal, but I just passed mile marker 154 and my speed dropped to 68. It's like the mile markers are somehow affecting my truck's performance. As Kevin continued eastbound, his speed decreased in direct correlation with the mile marker numbers. Mile marker 150 showed 65 miles per hour. Mile marker 145 showed 60 miles per hour. The pattern was consistent and impossible. His truck was responding to geographic markers as if they were speed limit signs that decreased automatically. Traffic control. This is getting weird. I'm now at mile marker 140, doing 55 miles per hour with my cruise control still set at 70. And the really strange part is that I can see other trucks ahead of me that appear to be moving even slower. There's one that looks like it's barely crawling. I checked traffic monitoring systems. Kevin's GPS showed normal eastbound progress, but his reported speeds were becoming dangerously low for interstate travel. Kevin, recommend you exit at the next available interchange and check your vehicle thoroughly. Can't do that. There are no exits in this section, and I can't increase speed no matter what I do with the throttle. I'm at mile marker 135 now, doing 45 miles per hour. And DOT control, the truck ahead of me. I think it stopped. Just sitting in the right lane at mile marker 130. Kevin's transmissions became increasingly urgent as his speed continued to decrease. Mile marker 125 showed 35 miles per hour. Mile marker 120 showed 25 miles per hour. The pattern suggested that at mile marker 100, his truck would come to a complete stop. Dot control. I can see what happened to the stopped truck. It's at mile marker 100, completely motionless. The driver's still behind the wheel, but he looks wrong, like he's been sitting there for years. And behind him, there are more trucks, all stopped at mile marker 100, all with drivers who look like they've been waiting forever. Kevin, use your emergency equipment to alert other traffic and prepare for emergency stop procedures. That's just it. I don't think I'm going to stop. At mile marker 110, my speed dropped to 15 miles per hour. But at mile marker 105, something changed. I started moving faster again, but in the wrong direction. My speedometer shows 20 miles per hour, but I'm driving backwards while facing forward. Kevin's description defied physics and logic. According to his reports, his truck was moving in reverse, while his engine continued running normally forward, as if the highway itself was moving backwards beneath his wheels, faster than his forward progress. Dot control. I'm at mile marker 100 now, but I didn't stop like the other trucks. I'm moving backwards at 25 miles per hour, still trying to drive forward. It's like the road is pulling me back toward mile marker 0, wherever that is, and control. I can see the stopped trucks more clearly now. The drivers aren't just waiting, they're trying to escape something. They're all revving their engines, trying to move forward, but they can't overcome whatever force is pulling them backwards. Kevin's final clear transmission came as he passed mile marker 95. I understand now. The mile markers aren't just counting backwards, they're counting down to 0. And when you reach 0, something happens that makes you stop trying to escape. I'm going to keep driving forward as hard as I can, racing against the backwards pull, trying to outrun the countdown before it reaches 0. Static consumed Kevin's radio frequency. When Nevada Highway Patrol units reached the area 2 hours later, they found Kevin's truck traveling eastbound in reverse at 60 miles per hour, while Kevin frantically worked his controls as if driving forward. His speedometer showed forward progress, but his truck was moving backwards down the highway at increasing speed. Kevin was conscious but insisted he was driving forward, racing to escape the mile that goes to 0. His odometer showed he'd traveled hundreds of miles forward, while observers watched him drive backwards. When patrol officers tried to stop his truck, Kevin panicked, explaining that stopping would allow the backwards pull to drag him to mile marker 0, where all the stopped drivers were waiting for something that would make them forget they'd ever wanted to move forward. The official report listed Kevin's condition as disorientation caused by heat exhaustion and equipment malfunction. But sometimes, drivers crossing the 40-mile desert report seeing trucks driving backwards at high speed. Their drivers working frantically to move forward, while being pulled toward a mile marker that doesn't appear on any map, mile marker 0, where the countdown ends and the road finally stops measuring distance in any direction that leads anywhere else. Some highways carry more than just the weight of their cargo. I'm Eleanor Hutchins, and I've been working scale operations for the North Dakota Department of Transportation for 12 years. My station monitors Interstate 94 through the Cheyenne River Valley, where the highway cuts across some of the most productive agricultural land in the upper Midwest. The route serves as a major freight corridor between Minneapolis and the western states, carrying everything from grain shipments to oversized industrial equipment across terrain so flat you can see approaching traffic from miles away. The work involves operating electronic scales that weigh commercial vehicles to ensure compliance with load limits designed to protect highway infrastructure. Overweight trucks can damage bridges and road surfaces, so my job requires careful attention to weight distribution, axle loads, and proper documentation for vehicles carrying legal loads. Most interactions are routine professional drivers who understand weight regulations and cooperate with inspection procedures. The Cheyenne River Valley presents unique challenges for heavy freight. The soil is rich but soft, requiring careful engineering for highway foundations that can support massive loads without settling. During spring thaw, weight restrictions become even more critical as frost leaves the ground and reduces load-bearing capacity. Despite these challenges, the highway has maintained excellent structural integrity and provides reliable service for the heaviest commercial vehicles. But in December of 2024, my scales started recording weight measurements that defied every principle of physics and engineering I understood. It began with trucks registering partial weight readings in specific sections of the highway. Vehicles that had weighed normally at entry scales would show dramatically reduced weight readings at exit scales just 20 miles later. Not weight loss from burned fuel or shifted cargo, but reductions that suggested the trucks themselves were becoming lighter while traveling through the valley. The first anomaly involved Robert Chen, hauling farm equipment from Minnesota to Montana. His truck weighed 80,000 pounds at the entry scale, exactly at legal limit. 20 minutes later at the exit scale, the same truck registered 45,000 pounds, a weight loss of 35,000 pounds with no explanation for where the missing weight had gone. "Operator, this doesn't make sense," Robert reported. "I haven't unloaded anything, haven't stopped anywhere, haven't even burned enough fuel to account for more than a few hundred pounds of weight loss. But your scale shows I'm missing 17.5 tons. I recalibrated the exit scale, tested it with certified weights, verified all electronic systems. The scale was functioning perfectly. But Robert's truck continued to register 45,000 pounds, despite carrying a load that should have weighed 80,000 pounds. The missing weight had simply vanished during his 20-mile journey through the valley. Over the following weeks, the phenomenon became more frequent and more extreme. Trucks entering the valley at legal weight would exit showing readings that suggested they were carrying no cargo at all. Some vehicles registered negative weight readings, as if they were somehow lighter than empty trucks, defying basic principles of mass and gravity. More disturbing were reports from drivers who claimed to feel their trucks becoming lighter while traveling through the affected section. They described sensations of reduced traction, steering that became increasingly sensitive, and the feeling that their vehicles were barely maintaining contact with the road surface. That's when Gregory Foster came through with his heavy haul load. Gregory was a 50-year-old specialist in oversized freight, with permits and expertise for loads that exceeded normal weight and dimension limits. He was hauling a massive industrial generator from a manufacturing plant in Wisconsin to a power facility in Montana, a load that required careful route planning, escort vehicles, and precise weight distribution to comply with highway engineering limits. Gregory's load registered 120,000 pounds at the entry scale, properly distributed across multiple axles, and within legal limits for his specialized permits. Everything appeared normal as he entered the valley section of I-94, maintaining reduced speed appropriate for heavy haul operations. But 15 minutes later, Gregory's radio transmission indicated something impossible was happening. "Scale operator, this is Gregory with the generator load. I'm experiencing some kind of mechanical anomaly. My truck feels like it's losing weight while I'm driving. The steering is becoming hypersensitive, and I can feel the trailer getting lighter behind me. Gregory, check your load securement and cargo distribution. You might be experiencing shifting." Negative on cargo shifting. The generator is secured properly, all tie-downs tight, but the truck is definitely getting lighter. I can feel it in the suspension, the way the steering responds, the engine load characteristics. It's like gravity is gradually releasing its hold on my rig. As Gregory continued through the valley, his reports became increasingly concerned. He described feeling his truck begin to lift slightly off the road surface, maintaining forward motion, but with reduced ground contact. The sensation progressed until he reported that his wheels were barely touching the asphalt. "Scale operator, this is impossible, but I think my truck is starting to float. The wheels are still turning, the engine's running normally, but I can see daylight under my tires. I'm driving about 2 inches above the highway surface. I dispatched emergency vehicles to Gregory's location, but his reports continued to describe conditions that seemed to violate fundamental physics. According to his transmissions, his entire rig, truck, trailer, and 120,000-pound generator was floating above the highway while continuing to move forward under its own power. Scale operator, I'm now completely airborne, maybe 6 inches off the road surface. The truck is responding to steering and throttle inputs, but we're flying rather than driving. And the strangest part is that it feels natural. Like this is how trucks are supposed to operate. Gregory's final coherent transmission came as he approached the valley's eastern edge. I can see the exit scale ahead, but I don't think I'm going to make it there. The floating sensation is increasing. I may be 3 feet off the highway now, and the truck is starting to drift sideways toward the cornfields. Engines still running, all systems normal, but I'm flying through the air like gravity doesn't apply to me anymore. Static replaced Gregory's voice. When emergency crews reached his last known position, they found no trace of Gregory, his truck, or the generator load. The highway showed no skid marks, no debris, no evidence that a heavy haul vehicle had experienced any kind of incident. But search teams discovered something that defied explanation. In the cornfield adjacent to the highway, approximately 10 feet above the crop canopy, they found tire tracks impressed in the air itself, parallel depressions that showed the tread pattern of Gregory's truck and trailer, suspended in midair as if invisible pavement existed above the corn stalks. The aerial tire tracks extended for nearly a mile through the cornfield, maintaining consistent spacing and depth as if Gregory's rig had continued driving on an invisible elevated highway. The tracks showed normal steering adjustments and braking patterns, suggesting controlled operation even while airborne. But the tracks ended abruptly above a section of field where the corn showed no signs of disturbance, as if Gregory's truck had simply continued flying into dimensions that existed beyond visible reality. Soil analysis of the areas below the suspended tire tracks showed gravitational anomalies. Objects dropped from normal height fell more slowly in those locations, as if local gravity operated at reduced intensity. Metal detectors registered the presence of large ferrous objects directly above the cornfield, but visual inspection revealed only empty air and the mysterious tire impressions that marked Gregory's passage through space that shouldn't have been able to support the weight of anything, let alone a 120,000-pound load. I transferred to a different scale facility 6 months later. But sometimes, when atmospheric conditions are just right, drivers report seeing the shadow of a large truck moving across the cornfields parallel to I-94, a shadow cast by something flying too high to be visible, following the route of tire tracks that still hang in the air above the Cheyenne River Valley, marking the path where heavy haul loads continue their deliveries in the space above the highway where weight has no meaning and gravity forgot how to pull things down.